Can you tell our viewers what is this urban flooding? How is it different from the normal flooding that we generally have?
So a flood would be whenever water is in a place which is normally supposed to be dry. Water is overflowing to an area where it's not supposed to be, it's not a water body, it's the dry land.
There might be some pattern causes behind it. So what are some causes that leads to this urban flooding?
Ultimately, this city is not properly planned according to the people migration and all. Bigger people are coming, so definitely they will make their own houses and different other infrastructures. So there are so many problems like man-made and urban planning. These are the two main causes behind
What can be attributed more to these causes?
That particular water body is an integral part of water cycle, and that particular water body helps us in mitigating impact of a disaster. For example, let's say whenever you have excessive rainfall, then these are the water bodies, the wetlands, the lakes, the floodplains, which essentially reduce the momentum of the water.
Hello and welcome to this another edition of The Perspective by Vision IEs. Every monsoon, we see a same story of road filled with waters and urban flooding happening in any or every city of India. So what is this urban flooding? What causes this urban flooding? What are the consequences and how we need to tackle this? Today, we will discuss this with our esteemed faculty members, Abhishek sir, Jasmine ma'am, Ravi sir. Welcome you all. Jasmine ma'am, before we start, can you tell our viewers what is this urban flooding? How is it different from the normal flooding that we generally have?
Yeah, so if we say urban flooding, maybe we can distinguish it by saying something like rural flooding, right? Or like you said, normal flooding. So a flood would be whenever water is in a place which is normally supposed to be dry. Water is overflowing to an area where it's not supposed to be, it's not a water body, it's the dry land. And usually it would happen when there's heavy downpour, the river water level is rising, and then the river water would be overflowing. That's what we understand as rural flooding also. It takes a lot of time for that to happen. But we are now seeing a new phenomena, like you're talking about roads filled with water. That is what is urban flooding. In this now, there's no river, but there is an inherent problem, you can say, basically with the drainage system. When there is heavy rainfall, and with that, you have water collecting in an area. And the key distinction here would be the timing. It can happen very quickly. Like within hours also, you can have a situation which will be similar to a flood-like situation or water collecting in a particular place. So that is what is new about this, or that is what is this urban flooding.
Ravi sir, like it is not now a one-off situation which might happen anywhere, right? We see it happening again and again, city after city, year after year. So there might be some pattern causes behind it. So what are some causes that leads to this urban flooding?
Actually, these all problems not generated within a day. It's a long-term process. The main reason is a man-made. Second one, like urban planning that even made. A man-made, everybody know very well, there are massive resources are available in the urban cities. So people start migrations. Migration, so it's already started from last many years because of it, job employment generation or many other option facilities. Those are for the better life. In these cases, like urban areas not much more planned. Okay, if you see the example of Gurugram, so I found like after having a population, the city we start to design. So ultimately, this city is not properly planned according to the people migration and all. Bigger people are coming, so definitely they will make their own houses and different other infrastructures. So there are so many problems like man-made and urban plannings. These are the two main causes behind migration, and later on, the water disposals, the process not going to be properly. So these are the main causes those I found.
Abhishek sir, what can be attributed more to these causes?
So, building on to what Sir said, that lack of planning, and one very obvious pattern which you can see in many cities, that think of some of the natural water bodies which exist in urban areas. And we might think that they are simply there, a source of fresh water, but it's much more than that. That particular water body is an integral part of water cycle, and that particular water body helps us in mitigating impact of a disaster. For example, let's say whenever you have excessive rainfall, then these are the water bodies, the wetlands, the lakes, the floodplains, which essentially reduce the momentum of the water, and they reduce the severity of a disaster which otherwise could have. Now, the problem of unplanned migration, as Sir pointed out, and the unplanned urbanization is that many of these water bodies are disappearing. And you see that all across the country, that many of the water bodies are disappearing. First. Second, on many floodplains, there is huge encroachment, and you have lack of political will also. It becomes a politically sensitive issue to do something about it. And both of these then things combined with, and so one more thing which I want to add, and people do not talk about this enough, particularly at the public policy level, that we have to make our policy based on the current climate realities, because climate change has to be integrated in our current public policy. Many of our drainage systems were built for rainfall, which was based on the data perhaps 50 years ago. And the current reality is very different. So based on what is happening right now, right? So this will be an adaptation project. The climate change is real, it is happening, and we have to adapt to it. So accordingly, our drainage system also has to be better. And that will perhaps require a unique master plan for each and every city, which will accommodate the problem of migration, which will accommodate the problem of climate realities, and which definitely should think about how to preserve the existing water bodies.
I want to add the social aspect also to this. So if we look at this from the perspective of the people, of course there is a planning gap, but in terms of people who are actually using these public resources, they also have this increased tendency of not taking care of aspects like garbage disposal. In urban areas, this becomes the biggest problem, that how your garbage management is happening, because this garbage is getting stuck into all those drainage systems. Why the drainage system is not working efficiently is because garbage segregation is not there, its disposal is not there, things are there on the road, they're piling up in drains. That is one very big problem. Along with, of course, like Sir has said, encroachments. Because we have an increased demand of housing and this whole thing of migration, people are coming, they're building up houses, those cities are coming up, but they might be having some existing plan also, but that's not followed. They will be building more than they are required to. There would be no green zones. If some area around the road has to be left out for, let's say, natural seepage to happen, some muddy region is there, but that's also concretized. So this concretization comes up to be like the biggest cause why this whole thing is being driven, and it's happening very rapidly. Along with this, when we talk about again the plan or the governmental aspect of things here, there the biggest problem is multiple focus is there, multiple agencies are there, like maybe housing is being managed by a different agency, and then if there's a river nearby, that would be managed by somebody else, the irrigation departments get involved, and of course you have in the urban areas the municipality or the municipal corporations, which are the main agency. So the focus between, who decides how the buildings will come up, how the plan will come up, and who manages that whole drainage and sewage system, that is very divided. So everybody is doing their own thing, there's no integration of plans, and ultimately when the problem also comes or when the flooding also happens, there is no one way to look at it or one way to solve it, because bits and pieces are involved in this whole setup. It's a huge problem, and integration of that from the end of government is something which is really missing.
So we can say the issue arises from lack of management of flowing water in urban areas, either in terms of planning before those areas are built, or management in terms of after they are being built, and the flow. Nobody is looking about how will water flow in this city.
Yeah, definitely. Earlier, it was a plain ground, plain field was there. So they absorb the massive amount of waters. And now everything is going to be formed as a road construction. So earlier, the Bengaluru was called as a soaking city. Okay. So अब sponges cities like words. Now these kind of things not going to fulfill. So where the water will go? So of course after heavy rain, this all the water logging definitely is very common. Same thing we can see in Delhi also. These are very common problems.
So as you mentioned about Bangalore, so let's talk about the consequences of these urban flooding. And one of them is that my friend says that normally if you go to office in Bangalore, you have to go 3 hours before. But in monsoon, you have to go 1 day before. So that is one of the consequences. So what are the consequences of these urban flooding?
Actually, in reference of Bengaluru, I'll tell you, like I heard that around 1,000+ gardens were there. Now, because of rapid urbanization, the garden number is going to reduce. And the urban planning is actually not well according to demands. and massive constructions, the building construction, etc. Even I heard it like one of the news, because of flood in urban areas. So I'm telling in the Bengaluru especially, 220 crore something rupees losses in 2022, as I found a report it. Reason, IT cities. The people are not ready to go in the offices and all. So it's actual, I found economy problems, social problems, survival problems, even health issues. There are so many problems that even started in Bangalore. Even it was the news like in Bangalore, whenever the monsoon season will come, this Bangalore is totally planned and have no problem. But what I found, like early rain happened, and because of this massive flood and massive problems even generated in the Bangalore, and the life in the Bangalore was very difficult to be there in that period of time. Means everything is not according to administrative system that madam said. It was not properly planned in Bangalore.
In fact, sir pointed out about health, and I wanted to add that think about how the problem of solid waste management and problem of lack of sewage system, and how this leads to all together to a new set of problem where you have waste flowing, and that becomes like a hub of microbes to grow, and it becomes its own sort of disease problem. So a new problem emerges due to urban flooding. Yeah, that is there. Another problem is that how think about that this trust deficit which people have, because think about that whenever in Gurgaon or in Delhi for that matter, that some work starts happening just before monsoon, and people will say that this is a piecemeal approach where you are trying to show that you are doing something, but you are not solving the problem at the very root causes at the structural level itself. And when disaster happens and you talk about compensations, last year a tragedy had happened to very close to where we are having this recording here. And people will talk about compensation, but what about the structural problems which already exist? So, and that requires a long-term planning. That cannot be a piecemeal approach that you want to simply show something that you are doing. You need to collect data. You need to figure out the choke points where water is accumulating. You have to know the sources from which this water is accumulating, and that requires a proper scientific assessment of the problem, data collection. Then you design a policy, you implement that policy, and even after that you see that is it working well. So we always have to leave some scope that we have to be better at what we are trying to do. So unless we do not integrate that in our planning, it is a problem which is going to be there even in future.
Here I'd add on one point, like historical data just said, sir said it's very important, like what happened in the past. If that data we are going to observe and accordingly we are going to plan, so definitely it will be very helpful. So data accumulation, data interpretation is very important factor even we should have to consider. Like just like in every cities have a different circumstances, different climatic variation, etc. So that previous historical data will definitely be very helpful to us, like to understand about which kind of problem in this area and which time happened in different months, etc. And accordingly, we should have to plan. So it will be more better in the case of urban flooding to solve this kind of problems.
And like as like climate change arrives and there will be shortages of water, somebody like me who comes from Rajasthan, the one thing that strikes me more about urban flooding is the loss of water. Like, the thing come is isko bachao, is pani ko save karo. And as what you said, sir, like there used to be urban water bodies. Now, due to encroachment and that natural flow of water to those bodies, we are also having water scarcity. At the same time, we are having this urban flooding. So this is also an important consequences of it.
It looks like a paradoxical
Paradox,
situation, right?
exactly.
So
and
yeah,
same Bangalore at times faces water scarcity sometimes. Not Bangalore, but Chennai, like city, it has faced water scarcity also, and then it faces flooding also. So that becomes paradoxical.
I will connect this to what ma'am said and what sir also said. That think about when we read about water cycle. So think of this as a now as a like add some science to this entire particular issue. When you think of water cycle, you realize that a very important part of water cycle is that seepage of water, and that is how natural aquifers get recharged. So the concretization part, which ma'am mentioned, that it does not just add to the problem of urban flooding. It actually adversely affects the water cycle. Particularly, water does not go anywhere. Remember, it's conservation of matter. Water is there. It's just that this water is not going to do a lot in recharging of the aquifer, and we are extracting more and more water from those aquifers. So yeah, it's not just flooding, but it is also lack of availability of fresh water, to be particularly fresh water. that's also a problem.
Deeply impacts the hydrological cycle of cities also. So, ma'am, now what can we do about it? One challenge that is, if we talk about way forwards, that we have the city planning is done. You cannot build the new city again. So, within this boundary condition, what can we do to solve this urban flooding problem?
So I would like to start by saying that this has to be looked up as a long-term correction. This cannot work with any kind of short-term treatments or changes or solutions. If you want to solve this problem, because it's going to be there in future also, like we've seen so many incidences, it's happening every year. So if this needs correction, there has to be a long-term plan, and long-term plan will mean all parties which are involved, they have to participate. Municipal corporations are the one of the main main body which is going to be coordinating everything. So for them, whenever the problem is discussed, the issue comes in the way of funding. That okay, we want to do something, we want to upgrade the drainage system, but we don't have money. So for them, they need to work. Plans should be such that they have access to more funding, they have more control over more funding, and in this maybe some form of local taxation can be incorporated. If that has to be justified, then one more aspect which will need to be incorporated into these urban plans would be participation of citizens. That has shown a lot of promise whenever it has been tried in a lot of parts of the world, that if you have community participation in management of any kind of resources, those resources are managed better. And if the community is participating, they might be a little bit more inclined towards, paying those additional taxes also, because again, you need some rationalization for that. So keeping the population, the current population, like sir in the beginning had said, the city, the population has come and you're designing the city after that. Now people are there, now colonies are coming up. So now that you're already in that stage where you're overpopulated, considering the current population and whatever flows are expected in future, the whole redesign has to happen. It has to be scientifically upgraded, and climate change factor has to be incorporated. So we talk about climate-based adaptation plans. Okay, so you need to adapt at whatever the climatic condition are, because rainfall also is not happening like it used to. Okay, maybe the amounts are same, but in one day you see extreme data that okay, in 150 years it has never rained so much in Gurugram. Those kind of statistics are there. So keeping all that in mind, you need climate adaptation based scientific plans with, of course, a little bit more funding and a little bit more detailed long-term plans for the cities.
To actually, there are a few examples I found in Kolkata, as Madam is telling, like people participation is very important. So in Maharashtra is one of the district areas, I think in Kolkata nearby areas. And one is I think some Sarovar is, I think, Ravindra Sarovar, I think. And there are some areas where the people participation even being very successful here. The people participation definitely is very important factor, okay, in these all the cases.
Can I do a small digression to what ma'am was saying? And I have my own frustration about this entire issue of funding to MCD. And this is, perhaps we'll have a separate discussion about this issue in detail, about the funding to local governments. I often feel, for example, I am a huge fan of fiscal federalism, I'm a huge fan of decentralization. And I often feel that we do not talk about this problem enough, that local self-governments have very less amount of money available. Again, this is not only for urban flooding, but in general, I'm talking about for all the duty which they have been assigned to. For example, every state wants more money from the center, and yes, they should get that. I have no problem with that. The problem is that this money is not actually delegated to, a very small amount of money is delegated to the local self-government. So a lack of funding is a very serious problem. Can I also talk about some of the technological solutions?
Yes, sir. I was about to come to that. It is your area of expertise. So how can science and tech help us resolve this issue?
Few things which can be done. I do think that some of the modern technologies which are at our disposal, that can be integrated really well. So, for example, think about how much capability enhancement has occurred in remote sensing data. We have very powerful satellites. We have satellite data. And thankfully now government has liberalized that data sharing policy also. That's a good thing. We have very powerful sensors like LiDAR sensor. which can work with help of satellite but does not need a satellite. We can do that with many other devices. So we have data, we need to collate that data, and based on that data we have to, as I was talking earlier, that we have to design our public policy in a better manner. So that is one thing. Second thing that we cannot, and as ma'am pointed out, as sir pointed out, that we cannot emphasize enough on the significance of the water buffers which exist in our urban areas, that we need to ensure that they are regenerated, they are reinvigorated, they are restored properly. That's very important. A master plan for each and every city, because it cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. A similar set of solution may work in Delhi, but may not work in Bengaluru. So we have to think about different solution, and that is why data collection, data analysis, in implementation, and even in review everywhere, this is going to be very, very helpful. We should also think about the alternatives to concretization, that wherever it is important, wherever it is not important, and what can be done to tackle those issues. So yeah, I do see that there are some technological solutions available, and that should be integrated as part of our public policy.
Ma'am, this nature-based solutions, they are also being sought for urban flooding, vis-a-vis, having that green part in the urban areas. Now the issue is, where do we have that green part in cities that are concretized? So how do we integrate that?
Actually, in a lot of places, these laws are there. All states have this law that if any construction has to happen anywhere, there is a fixed portion which cannot be constructed, which cannot be concretized. That's the fixed thing that you only get even if you have to build your own house. So there are rules like that everywhere which are there. They are already there, right? These green solution or green zones which have to be a part of the plan. The only challenge is that their implementation is not happening because there is inherent corruption in our system. So you can get a clearance on your house, on your building, which will say that, okay, this much area is going to be green, but you might not do it. So that has to be reinforced. I think the systems are already in place. In a lot of places, those guidelines are advisory. So where they are advisory, you make it mandatory. Then you also find a system which can reinforce that, where you have a system of checking it and fixing accountability. That is one problem. So if there's an urban flood in an area, let's say people are dying, like you had some big floods in Mumbai and Chennai, there is no fixing of accountability. Nobody went to jail. Nobody was penalized for that. So that whole system has to be, looked at again. That yes, you need people, you need authorities which will be in charge, which will be taking responsibility for this. And of course, at individual level also, individual constructions, housing, in that also, you need to make those rules mandatory and make sure they are applied.
And there are international examples also. London has integrated this nature-based solution very effectively in their urban planning.
In fact, some of the planned cities in India are with themselves. Chandigarh is a good example, or Greater Noida is another good example, that how you can do planned urbanization rather than completely unplanned policies.
So the crux of the way forward is actually what Sir said, that we need to avoid this patches and bits approach that we have for urban flooding. Every time looking at individually for a city, every time it happens, we need to have a holistic view vis-a-vis planning, vis-a-vis management, and also looking with the lens of climate change that is now there.
But even due to human interferences, even recent past, one of the example in Dubai can be identified, like because of artificial rain. Okay, they stopped the natural rain in the particular areas, and the bulk level of precipitation started in Dubai suddenly. Dubai, which is very dry areas, suddenly started to have a massive rain in that areas. So here somehow, because of artificial rain, still we are going to create an urban flooding problem nowadays.
Thank you so much, panelists, for such a detailed discussion on urban planning and urban flooding. It became a discussion about urban planning. That becomes a good way forward. So aspirants, I hope now you have a good clarity about urban flooding. What are the causes, what are the consequences, and most importantly, what are the holistic solutions for it? And to know more about such topics, stay tuned with the Perspective by Vision IAS. Thank you.